Hey folks, Andy Picker here. Thank you so much for joining me. Right, written a bit in the past about impulse responses, IRs, about what they are, how they're made. But sometimes the question kind of pulls back a little bit from there. And what we need to look at is what are they actually for? Now, we know that they emulate the effect of a loudspeaker with a microphone in a room and so on. And that's great, good to know. But when do we actually use them? What do we actually want to have these things in our kit bag for? So I'm just going to have a quick look now at 5 times when I might dig a bunch of IRs out of the kit bag to see what they can do for me. Right, the first one of these is when we're recording things in the studio, got some musicians in and got a guitar player fired up and ready to go. Now, it would be fantastic if whenever we're recording a band, we have all the time in the world to set up, to get the right microphones chosen, to get the right speaker cabs chosen, to get everything in the right place in the room, get everything set up absolutely perfectly. But the reality of life these days is that one, bands are always working on really tight budgets and time is money. And two, when a musician's ready to go, they really want to play. They just want to get on now and not sit around drinking coffee for an hour while the techie is plugging things in, moving things and trying to get a sound out of it. So what I will often do in the real world here is let the player dial in the amp that they're using to get the sound that they're after, the sound that they're chasing coming out through the cabs. And then I'll do the absolute bog standard microphone setup. I'll take a good old Shure SM57 and I'll put it a centimetre away from the grill cloth, put it just on the edge of the dust cap, use a torch, sort of peeking through the grill cloth and actually get the microphone just on that point, because it's a good recording. It may not be the best place on that particular cab, it may not be the best speaker on that cab, but you know what? It will get a decent recording made for them. Plug that in and we're good to go and record. But at the same time, I will take a DI and record that, because that means that I can then go back in later and add some of these cab effects in if I need to, if my placement isn't the best. So basically I can get a cab set up in a couple of minutes and nobody ever objects to that, and then plug in a DI. And you can do this either at the guitar level, take a DI and run it into an amp sim or reamp it later, or take it from the output of the guitarist amplifier using a special DI box that's intended to go in there, run that out, record that so that you get the power stage of their amp in place, and then get the sound set up later, because I'm happy to spend a couple of hours playing around with these options when the musicians have gone, when they're not sort of on their own dime and getting scratchy, just to get the best result we can out of it. And it's really quite amazing how often those DI recordings with a good impulse response that I've had the time to go through and choose and tailor actually end up going on to final recordings. Right, songwriting. The nature of songwriting for someone like me is that I spend a lot of time doing almost the same thing wrong over and over again. And when I'm doing that, I really don't want to be being blasted by 130 dB coming out of a steaming Marshall through a 412. I don't want to have to be pummeling my ears like that. I don't want everyone around me hearing me making a mess of the same part over and over again. And it's tiring, it burns your ears out, and it is really tiring. I like a nice low-level sound that's kind of quite civilized, that I can work with, that actually gives me enough room to think about what I'm doing. Now, I've never really bothered setting up a true zero latency recording rig, so what I will do is I'll fire up a little 5-watt combo amp that I've got, and I'll play through that. I won't even bother miking it, but I'll take a DI and run it into my DAW. Now, once upon a time, we used to make demos on cassette tapes, and everyone knew that a 4-track cassette demo was going to sound a bit ropey. Today, if you're making a demo, the kind of difference between the original songwriting demo that you might make and the final recording is very blurred, and very often you'll end up carrying things through. You often hear people saying that I never quite got the part to sound quite the same as it did the first time I played it. So you want to be able to do something good with those recordings whilst not overcomplicating things. When I'm working on a basic song structure, I will often put a drum groove down, and then I'll play a guitar part over it. And I'll be working out my intros and my verses, my pre-choruses and so on. And I'll play a part, and then I'll use that as a bed to start layering and orchestrating the rest of the song on. To make that bed part nice and simple, what I will do is I will take what may be a single guitar part and put it through a couple of amp sims. Now, I've got lots of amp sims, and if you look online at these things, you will constantly find comments from people saying, such and such an amp sim is the only one I'll ever use. This one's unusable. And I've often read about a certain very popular amp sim that's in forum land is completely and utterly unusable, that's been used to record entire albums by, top selling rock bands. So there's obviously a bit of subjectivity that goes into this. And for me, that will go so far as to say that I might want my bed track to be a Marshall Plexi or a Marshall JCM 800 sound, and I might want to use a particular DAW for a particular sim for doing that. And then quite often what I will do is throw something that's got either a thinner or a fatter sound on the other side just to balance out my stereo image. And I might find that I prefer that to come from a different amp sim. Now, different manufacturers do have different sounds to them. You get a sim of the same amp and you get the same sort of settings on it, and you can never make them sound quite the same. One of them might have a bit more mid-range poke to it, another one might have more top end, however you adjust the controls. And I like to be able to choose the sim that's the best for what I feel on the day for that particular amp. So I might have a Plexi from one manufacturer on the left, that's my left, and I might have an AC30 from another manufacturer on the right. In order to make them sound as though they were actually recorded in the same space, bearing in mind that we do have to go for that kind of high quality sound in our demos, and the fact that we may want to carry this through to a final recording, what I quite often do is turn off the cabs in the sims themselves and then load up a guitar bus with an IR loader on it and put a pair of related IRs for my hard left, my hard right. So I may get, what I feel on the day is the best sounding Marshall, the best sounding AC30, the best sounding Orange, the best sounding Mezza, and yet bring them in to sound as though they were recorded in the same space, maybe even through the same cab, but with the same microphone selection, by bringing them through a set of matching IRs. Right, let's talk about gear. I love great gear and I really love great microphones. I'd happily have stacks of polished hardwood boxes with classic German mics sitting in them. Problem is that most of those pieces of kit cost as much as this entire room that I work in does, and that's just not on. But for the sake of a few tens of pounds invested in impulse responses, I can have access not only to a bunch of world-class mics, but great examples of those mics that have been properly maintained over the decades. Even better than that, I can have them put in front of a whole range of world-class speakers that I can't afford in a room that costs maybe $1 million to build out, that I certainly can't afford, and put in place by top-class recording engineers that I also can't afford to employ. So basically, for the sake of a few tens of pounds worth of investment in my IRs, I can get access to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of expertise and gear at the point of actually making a recording. That sounds like a pretty good investment to me. And I don't have to maintain the mics. I started recording to record electric guitar cabs. And because I dread that microphone positioning is so totally important in the sound that you record, I figured out that the only thing I could do was to try everything and see what I liked. So I took the trusty SM57, put it on a stand in front of a 212 cab, and I put the microphone right in the center of the cab and got a sound set up on my amp, played, recorded it. Then I moved the microphone over a bit so it was on the edge of the dust cap, played, recorded it, moved it out a bit further, moved it out halfway to the edge, moved it out to the edge of the speaker, then brought everything back into the center, pulled it out a little bit, repeated the positions, did it again a bit further out, pulled back into the room, did each one of those those recordings a bit further out, angled the microphone that way, angled the microphone that way, repeated everything, ended up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of recordings, then sat down and listened back to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of recordings. And then because I wasn't quite sure of what I was listening to, do you know what? I did most of it over and over again. And what I found was that most of the recordings that I made were rubbish. They were absolutely unusable. And it wasn't because my technique was bad with a microphone or anything like that. It was simply because that little tiny bit of air pressure that your microphone is hearing isn't the same as you're hearing in the room. And the only way to hear it is with a microphone. And most of the things that the microphone is going to hear at a lot of positions around the speaker are not particularly good. If I had been doing that in a world with IRs in it, do you know what? I could have taken an IR library with a great speaker with a great microphone. I could have played, recorded, and then looped that recording through and just swapped out the IRs and gone, I love the sound of that one not so much, I love the sound of that one. And then made a note of what the positions of that those IRs were taken in, and then gone back, set my microphones up, and just worked on honing and perfecting the half dozen sounds that I actually end up using to this day without making hundreds or thousands of test recordings, that could have saved me. I mean, when I started, it was probably weeks before I settled down to actually make any real serious recordings because of doing this stuff. I learned my trade. It's the old school way of doing it, and I would never say don't do it, but you can certainly bypass this an awful lot by choosing and selecting when the work's already been done by the people who make these impulse responses. And you know what? It is not the same as watching a YouTube video that says, oh, put it here, it'll sound great, or reading a magazine article, because you actually get to do it with your own sounds and hear it, and you get to make your own choices, your own decisions, and then go back in and practice based on those, which ultimately is what it's all about. Right, the final one I'm going to look at is stage use, and this is something that I've played around with. I like real amps and real speakers on stage. I don't like in-ears. I'd rather work with monitors, but sometimes those stages are just not big enough to help. My band, we play some fairly small venues, and sometimes the stages are not stages. Sometimes they're really not big enough to get a decent setup on. And it would just be easy to go out and actually plug into the PA. Or sometimes, you know what, you've got such a short amount of time for setting your gear up and breaking down at the end of it that you don't really have time to set everything up. Or do you know what, sometimes loading gear in and out is just more effort than it seems like it should be. And I've started thinking, you get all these all-in-one boxes, but I kind of like the sound of, I like the idea, shall I say, of discrete stuff. So I've got some pedals, some distortion pedals that do a pretty good amp tone that I like. And I'm thinking that if I take something like one of those amp in a box pedals, you know, a MIAB, a Marshall in a box pedal, and then plug it into one of the new generation, you can get these little tiny pedals that are IR loaders that'll sit right there on a pedal board. I could put my Marshall in a box going into a delay pedal, going into one of these little tiny pedals with an IR loaded onto it, and effectively have my studio quality rig on a little pedal board that's about that big that'll just go in my gig bag. I can then take a simple output from the end of that, give it to the PA operator, the front of house person, and say, there you go, that's my signal, just plug that in dry, and off we go. Costs virtually next to nothing and a 2 or 3 minute setup time. So I'm seriously thinking that whilst I will never, as long as I have any way to use it, I will never get rid of my big boxes full of valves and transformers. Something that's easy to carry that I can set up like that has got a great sort of value to it, and that I can do it with the proper kind of full-on quality that I would work towards getting in the studio. Okay, that's just 5 ideas for times when I might dig out and fire up the IRs. And I know there are lots more. People are going to be sitting out there going, well, hang on, what about, why didn't he mention this one? I use this, I use them for this all the time. And that's great. If that's the case, please, 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 please drop a line in the comments down below. Let me know what they are. There's an email address down below. Shoot me a line. Let me know what you're doing. I will happily steal the best of your ideas. And if we get a few of them in, I'll knock together another quick video, give you a name check in there for what you suggest. So I'm Andy Picker. I really hope that's of some use. Do let me know. Take care and see you next time. Bye now.